The first layer that we are doing is AI-enabled employee. We are starting to see a gap between your employability. It's not only your efficiency. We know that it's not AI versus human. It's human with AI versus human without AI.
I'm interested when you're looking for someone who has talent potential, hidden potential. How do you identify that?
Curiosity is a very big one. The ambition of mastering your craft, an ability to connect.
I also saw fairly early on there you were leading a team of about 25 people. Was that your first step into a leadership type role?
First of all, it took me a while to understand how my role has shifted from a doer to a leader. Your job is not to get exhausted with them. Your job is to figure out what a way for them not to be exhausted, including finding the budget, rescaling the team.
Eglantine Etiemble, a dynamic global executive with a wealth of experience across consulting and manufacturing. Having successfully delivered complex projects and their diverse teams in over 20 countries spanning Europe, the US, and Asia Pacific, Eglantine is a true catalyst for innovation and business transformation. Eglantine has a proven track record with 25 years of experience at prestigious firms such as Capgemini, Axis Consultants, OI, Dulux Group, and now PEXA. She's also now a non-exec director at the Tech Council of Australia. Her expertise ranges from implementing new operating models and ERP systems to driving technological transformations, managing mergers and acquisitions, and introducing agile methodologies and flexible working. Eglantine is an inspiring leader and a dedicated advocate for diversity and inclusion. She's also known for her informal coaching through curated articles and conferences, sharing valuable insights on leveraging technology for business transformation and efficiency. Eglantine, thank you for joining me today. It's been a little while actually since we last caught up, so I'm really looking forward today to kind of hearing what's been going on, but also learning a bit more about your background and sort of where things began. And from my research, it looked like university was Excellier, which in La Rochelle,
Yes.
in the west of France. So how did you kind of end up there? Was that home for you?
Yes, actually, that was home for me. There was a couple of things in there. That was home for me, and I was looking at. I was looking for a program that was broad enough. I knew I had some quite broad interest, but I knew at the time I was already that I wanted to live abroad, and there wasn't that many programs at the time in France that were offering 1 or 2 years abroad. Excellier was one of the very first one where you had mandatory half of your studies would have to be with university, 1 or 2 universities abroad, and you'd have to pick up a language on top of the skills that you were learning. So that was my choice.
So I saw that because you went to Oxford Brookes.
Yes.
In the UK.
Yes.
Actually, before we go to that, I'm going to just a strange connection. When I was researching you and I saw La Rochelle, I had this flashback to secondary school. And when I was learning French.
Yes.
And the textbook that we had was a book called Tricolore, which I don't know if they use today,
Yes.
but it was about a family in La Rochelle.
Ooh.
And it was their kind of life adventures of going to school, getting a pet, going to the store to buy groceries, but it was all based in La Rochelle.
Oh, that's interesting, because it's not such a big city at all. It would be 100,000 people.
Exactly right. But all I remember is
gorgeous.
they drank tons of Orangina.
Yes, they would.
That's all I really remember from French, and my French is awful. So, but that was my takeaway. I was just thinking, my impression of as a teenager of France was, you just all lived at the beach and
That's what they do.
drank
That's what
Orangina.
they do.
That's
Actually, La Rochelle is a gorgeous university city now. It's a beautiful city by the sea, but it has a very rich university life. So it makes it a beautiful, attractive place where you have a great lifestyle and restaurants, and it's small enough but vibrant enough that it attracts law, engineering, commerce, science, university.
I think that's one of the great things about Europe is there's a lot of those cities that are defined by being a university city in many ways. I went to Leuven actually in Belgium, which is exactly, I think it's where Stella Artois is actually from, but as a city, it's a university city, and it's got that culture and richness and diversity of thought and innovation. So there you go, La Rochelle. It's where it's at. But you went to Oxford Brookes.
Yeah.
So how was that, leaving home, going to England, and an adventure for you, I'd imagine?
Getting the thick of it. That was a big one. That was a huge one for me. As actually, I I had never left home. I was 18 and I was coming from a very big, tight family. And I would say particularly as a girl, I was not encouraged not to study really hard or to go abroad. So it wasn't something that I was necessarily really well prepared for.
Yeah.
And it was a challenge. And just being thrown at 18 in a country you know nothing about, having to study, find a job. And my level of English was, you know, very approximate, as you would do when you arrive in a country at 18. So it was probably initially one of the most challenging and the most formative experience I've had. So that's very high on my list now to my children, to make sure that they are exploring through their school degree or backpacking or that experience, because you have to learn. You're learning a lot of who you are. You're learning a lot of your abilities that you don't have the chance to explore when you're still living with your parents.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing experience for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's even if you think, I'd imagine La Rochelle to Oxford, it's probably not much difference, say, Melbourne to Sydney distance-wise. But such a different culture, I can imagine, and sort of diversity of or even language or food, music, interests, everything would have been so different.
And you need to put it in the context of it was the late 90s.
Yeah.
So you had, the university were not equipped with necessarily, we had the beginning of internet or email communication, but you didn't have emails in homes. People were not necessarily connected or wouldn't have necessarily a laptop. And you need to remember as well that I was a student. So the two things are, communication was very tough. We would still write and call, and it was very expensive. So I was really disconnected from my family and from that baseline of support. But as well as a student, I was always broke. So coming back home, like you would do today between Sydney and Melbourne, was not an opportunity either.
Of course.
So again, it's this. It's very hard to translate that to people nowadays, to say, no, actually, you know what, I would receive a letter from my mom once a week, and that was that was the kind of family support I was getting. And by the time I had an issue, you know, it was 2 weeks down the road before I was getting in sort of. So again, just this ability to be somehow a bit disconnected from your normal base and get to have to go somewhere else and explore. That was very rich from that perspective.
Well, it makes you much more self-sufficient.
It does. Yes.
And I'm going to sound like an old person when I say this, but I think we had to communicate better then.
Yes.
To make plans, to organise things. You couldn't rely on text or email. You had to. Yeah,
you had to organise better. But I think for me mostly it's the autonomy. I had to lift up the autonomy very quickly. I had to think through, you know, am I going to have enough in my bank account to eat this month? What about, you know, what are the jobs? How do I find a job in a country I don't know anybody and I haven't any experience? And you don't have a lot of. You have to go and search those answers by yourself.
What was the most unusual job you did at university?
Oh, that's no.
You can't answer that question.
No, actually, the most unusual, I did all the usual, giving courses and working internship in summer in companies. The most unusual was when I was in La Rochelle, we had this partnership with an alcohol company.
Yeah.
So we were just distributing alcohol in parties, and you would have like this surf on a backpack, and you would have alcohol that you would squeeze in there. So that was very unusual.
Yeah, there you go.
Good fun, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It all shapes us, right? And I think in those kind of jobs, you learn about interacting with people. It's like the foundations of stakeholder management for the future.
Yes.
I
think as well, when you're 18, 19, you need to understand your boundaries and the different things that you're going to enjoy or not. Right. So that's, I think we all face that with our children growing up as well. But sometimes testing the boundaries and doing this kind of job, definitely for me, that was quite enlightening into the kind of things I wanted to do and the kind of opportunities or the kind of thing I didn't want to do and the kind of work environments that I thought were not going to be something I would pursue at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were you thinking as you were coming out of university that was the kind of career that you would pursue?
Yeah, actually, I had this idea, and my father reminded me that not long ago. I had this idea. Very, very naive. So I had a commerce and finance background. Yeah. And my idea was to go into something like audit. Okay. And I thought audit was really interesting. I had this idea that I wanted to see a company across the different BUs and the different streams, and get a perspective on which I could help improve those different parts of the organization. So I had already the consulting in mind, but I had translated in audit, and I thought, I was explaining that to my dad 30 years ago, and he was telling me, oh my God, it's the job that nobody wants to talk to. You never get the chance to help any improvement at all. But it was this idea. So I was very lucky to start my career in consulting. And it was really this idea from the beginning of, first of all, I want to be able to see a lot of things, but I want to be able to have a job that cuts across the organization, that doesn't stay in the silo. And consulting really did offer that.
That's interesting. So it's almost, you were looking for that generalist depth, let's say, or breadth of knowledge very early on, because it was Capgemini that you joined.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, maybe you've already answered this, but what did you really enjoy about consulting, and what did it teach you?
So first of all, it was, again, imagine I was 22, so it was an opportunity to travel again and get some gigs everywhere, mostly in Europe, but in North Africa as well. There was a lot of fantastic opportunity. It was the beginning of the telco boom, so I was working in that sector, and there were so many things happening. Again, I loved the ability to see all the back end of an organization, have access to all the process, and I really loved that. I loved being able to change company and get to meet a lot of people and work on a lot of things. I did find that after a while, my adaptability kept on growing. I would get much faster into reading a situation, reading a challenge, getting to create the connection within a team. I would get much faster with that. I really enjoyed as well in Capgemini particularly. It was a very sophisticated organization. So the kind of structure and framework we were using, it's things that I've been using for the rest of my careers. And that's things that I would have learned in the first 6 months or 12 months of my career. So that was really great.
So in terms of like the basics about putting together a strategy,
exactly. Why do you need a RACI? How does a RACI look like? How do you communicate to different stakeholders? Manage senior stakeholder communication.
Yeah, that's great. And you left Capgemini after about 18 months or so, from what I could see, and you joined a business called Access Consultants, who, again, I did a bit of research. It looks like they're a couple hundred people, French business.
Yes.
So how is it different working for a smaller business as opposed to a global consulting firm?
Yes. So again, this was highly exploratory choices. So I was doing this big one, which I did enjoy a lot, and I wanted to try something else. What was interesting with Axis was you were getting to know everybody very quickly. It was much more run like a family business, so you would get to see really clearly what the owners had in mind. You had this sense a bit of community. I think what was probably less interesting at this early stage of my career is you didn't have the sophistication, the framework, and as well, which I didn't anticipate at all, you didn't have the choice of that many customers. So you would go and spend a year and a half somewhere, and that's where you were.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
So probably less opportunities for learning. I think I would have enjoyed it a little bit better further in my career, where I could have had more influence on how I would have shaped either the strategy or the customer profiles or even the team shape. But as a junior consultant, was probably... It was a good experience, but I probably learned less than in the previous one.
Yeah, got it. But I'm assuming in a business, because given it's smaller, you would have had more responsibility in many ways than you would have had at Capgemini?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily, because somehow you would end up being accountable for your stream, and you didn't have a lot of failover kind of support. So you'd have to. That is accurate, but in a larger business. We had access, through you had a stream of seniority that was working with you as well. So we had access and exposure to board and to exec, and I had access to that very early in my career.
Yeah. Okay.
So managing board conversation is something that I could see right away, and you end up having some potential accountability that would be much more senior right away.
Yeah. Okay. And I saw, if I'm correct, in that role that you specialised within SAP.
Yes, I did.
So at what point did sort of tech become an interest to you? How did that kind of form?
Yeah. So when I was with Capgemini, actually I was working in the strategy branch. Yeah. So we were doing a lot of, it was the telco boom. So we were doing organization setup, from the ground, super interesting. What's the business going to be about? What are the processes that are going to be underpinning it? How you do a lot of that. my slide, so very, very interesting. The only thing I felt in that was it was not hands-on enough for me. So I did find difficult to match, again, really early in this stage of my career, some really high-level concept or vision. This is what we're trying to become. This is roughly the big decision we are taking in place. This is the high-level process into what is the concrete impact into the organization.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of PowerPoint, and looking back, they were really useful. And actually, the results were amazing. But it was much harder for me to have a tangible sense of what my contribution was.
Yeah.
Where I remember the first time where my first workflow was live in SAP.
Yeah, wow.
That I remember.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember the emotion of that. I was so proud.
Mm-hmm.
It was an invoice reconciliation flow. So not exciting from here. But it was a massive intercompany challenge that this company was having, and we designed a solution, implemented it, and then we're starting to run the actual invoices, and the system was managing it. And that felt, very tangible, very concrete. And I thought it was a nice way to translate those high-level thinking, high-level problem into something that you could, measure and own. And at the end of the day, you're very clear about what you have done.
That's interesting. So very early on in your career, you established, from what I'm hearing, that you like to see the consequence or the impact of your work.
Yes.
Which is interesting. I remember once, this is at least a decade ago in the UK, and I was at the headquarters for BP, just outside London. And it's thousands of people all kind of milling around and doing things. I remember sitting there thinking, wow, nobody here is responsible for extracting oil, turning it into a product, getting it to the petrol station, and then pumping it into a car and taking the cash. Whereas in the job that we do in recruitment, we see the whole life cycle. And that's one of the things that I love about recruitment, is you can see the direct impact of the work that we do. And it sounds like, you can see there the emotion as in terms of seeing your workflow go live. And I think that's part of the early aspect of our careers is making sense of what motivates us, what we like to, and we may not consciously understand that at the time, but I think it does help us make better decisions about where we should go next.
Yes. I think when you're as your career evolves, or as you are getting more understanding of all those different pieces in the organization fit together, it's much easier to have a balance. So I still enjoy have things where concretely you can feel, oh, that's nice, that I did, and you can start to manage those much high level conceptual pieces that will inform ultimately the nitty-gritty work that needs to happen. So this balance between your strategy and the operation. Today, I find it quite enjoyable to have the balance. But I think it's again, as you start in your career, you don't necessarily see all the trail. You need as well to get a sense when you're finishing uni and you're in your first jobs. What is the contribution you're making? And I've just witnessed that very recently. You kind of forget that, but I've witnessed that very recently with an intern that we had for 2 months. It was her first exposure in cybersecurity. It was her first exposure in the work and the workforce. So for her, new environments and lots of things to learn. And the first day she had to do all those reading just to get, to understand that's the environment, and there was a lot of compliance reading. But on the second day, one of our cyber leader said, no, okay, let's get her something to do. And he said, okay, we're going to have this insurance presentation in 10 days or a week. I need a slide that summarizes blah, 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 and that takes that. And it was quite a complicated ask. I need you to do that. I need you to present it back to the team by the end of the week. And it will go into the pack for the insurance next week. And the pride, first the fear that she had, but the pride of that, she kept on saying, and I've been asked, and it's going to go for the pride of, this is my contribution. I've done that. And she kept on telling me, and you know what? It was a very good slide, which was, beautiful and amazing. So this, just feeding us all with this clarity of, this is the impact that you're making. This is the work that you're doing. This is impact that you're making. It's so important.
I was listening to Adam Grant, the psychologist, on his Rethinking podcast recently. And someone asked him, what are you rethinking? And his answer, something I've been thinking about a lot since. And he was saying that he's rethinking the concept of productivity in the sense that a lot of people look at how many things did they tick off to do that day. Whereas he's rethinking about it in terms of what value did I add today? Or what impact did I have today? and how do I quantify that?
Yeah.
And that's probably something we need to get better at in industry or in leadership generally. But it's because it's very easy to come in and be busy. But is it having an impact? Is it having a consequence? Is there real value that's being driven? And that's a beautiful example with the intern about what a great lesson early in their career about the impact and the learning from that. No doubt the feedback and the emotion of going from the fear to the accomplishment, because that's part of the journey too, isn't it?
Yes.
And in terms of learning, I think. Yeah, that's great. After a couple of years then with Access, you left and went to OI Group. I believe you pronounced it OI Group.
Yeah.
We actually spent the next 16 years.
Yes.
And you went there through a multitude of promotions and a couple of relocations from what I could see.
Yeah.
For those people that may not be familiar, OI Group is a Fortune 500 glass packaging company.
Exactly.
Have I got that right?
Exactly.
So what drew you to that organization from consulting into industry?
Yeah. So when I had moved to Axis, I had been already for a couple of years abroad, maybe 4 years abroad, and I was about to get married. So I thought as well, I want to have something in France for a while, but. After a year in France, I was like, oh, I'm probably ready to to travel again. And I was looking for an organization that would allow me to have some time in France, but to have a much more broader scope. And at that time, I had been 3 years in consulting, which is not a lot, but when you're 25, that feels like a long time. And I had loved the adaptability and the learning, etc. But I was very keen to stay somewhere and do something and see the outcome of that. Yeah. That was getting very clear and very strong. And I ran into this company. So actually, initially, it wasn't OI. It was a company called BSN that got acquired later down the road. So the two first years were a European-based only company, still one of the leader on the market, glass packaging market. And it had activities across Europe. So I actually was very positively surprised by the team I met. They had a great culture. They had operations across Europe, and they had a kind of a head office in Paris. And so I joined it as a SAP consultant as well, so taking the skills that I had just been honing in for the last 18 months, but in an internal environment. And I think I would have never stayed that long. Actually, after 2 years, I thought that's 18 months. That was probably it. But then it got acquired.
Got it.
And it was a very different journey from there on. So it became an international group, much larger. It was a $7 billion US business, 30,000 people across the group. So all of a sudden it was much different scale, much different sophistication as well, into their different process from end-to-end supply chain, people management, really well-established company, and very ambitious. And they had a fantastic talent program management. So once you were in the high potential pipeline, you were getting a lot of opportunities in different places. So that was fantastic. And actually, the first person I met over there, so I was coming back from maternity leave, and the company had been acquired, and I wasn't quite sure of what I would find after 3 months. And the group CIO was there. And the group CIO was a gentleman named Jed Doyle. Jed Doyle is actually a Melbourne-based Australian CIO who was after that the CIO of La Trobe University and many other things. And I was fascinated by that man. He was very different to the kind of leaders we would have seen in France or in Europe, much very bold and forward-thinking and great energy and not hierarchical at all. And he became a fantastic mentor of mine. So I think from there on, I was on a different, it was a very different opportunity and different path. So for the little story, I happened to work completely accidentally, but I found out that in PEXA, where I work now, his niece is working as well. So it's a small world.
There you go. And so through that, again, you did lots of different roles. I saw there you were head of SAP for finance. I also saw fairly early on there you were leading a team of about 25 people. Was that your first step into a leadership type role? Yeah. I think the last says it all. So what challenges did you face in that?
I think the smile that you see. What challenges did you face? So this one was actually such a great team. So when OI acquired the organization I was part of, it was part of a much bigger acquisition, and the company went into what are we as a group? How do we reorganize our process, and particularly across Europe, which was almost half of the business. So we went into this really massive operating model rethinking, and then implementation and process, and so I was part of that team. I was part of that team because I had good process experience, good SAP experience, and I could speak English.
Yeah.
So that was a winning ticket for me. And I was never afraid to challenge what I was hearing, and I think that's why we would get on so well with Jed as well. Is I would always call out something that I would see, so that we would bring a different perspective. So it was a pretty big deal, this team, because I was already looking after SAP Finance for Europe. That was in a maintenance kind of mode, and it's a smaller team. But this was really the design of all the processes and systems that would be supporting a new operating model across 12 different countries, etc. So that was a pretty big deal for me. And it was tapping into my strengths, and my team was really amazing. But the couple of challenges I had were probably, first of all, it took me a while to understand how my role has shifted from a doer to a leader. Mm-hmm. And I remember an evening where I was with the team really late, and actually the CIO pulled me in his office and said, what are you doing? I said, we're finishing this thing, we're testing tomorrow, I'm staying with the team, I'm not letting them down. I was feeling a bit like a hero.
Yeah.
And he said, your job is not to get exhausted with them. Your job is to figure out what a way for them not to be exhausted, including, finding the budget, rescaling the team. But your job is not to be exhausted with them. And I moved from being a hero to feeling like I had totally failed them.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a aha moment for me, this one.
Is that, do you think, the distinction between management and leadership?
Wow, you're opening such another bigger conversation here. I don't know. I think even if you're seeing yourself as a manager and not as a leader, I think the difference of a leader is more how do you inspire and create the condition for success. Mm-hmm. As a manager, is how do you make sure that you have the right process and the framework for this to run. It's not how it's going to look like tomorrow, but at least today it runs. I think that was just me being a doer in the doer, not even the manager of the team.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I think I saw in that role, and I think if you just touched on there you were managing people across 4 continents as well.
Yes.
Yes. So how did you manage working such a diverse range of backgrounds and cultures?
Yeah, because we had we had people in Europe, North America, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. Listen, like in all fairness, the organization was working like that. I was not the only one at all. It's not something I set up. So we already had quite a good series of process. We didn't have the right communication channel at the time. Skype wasn't such a big thing at the beginning, so it was mostly phone conversation and emails, and that's a lot gets lost in translation for that. So I was making sure I did a lot of travel at that time. I was making sure that I knew the team well enough so that when I'd get written communication, I understood where they were coming from. I made sure that the team had points of connection regular enough. But for me, it was a lot of getting to know them and getting to spend enough time in geography so that we could build that up. We didn't have the luxury of having, Teams and Zooms, and so that required quite a bit of travel, quite a bit of individual understanding. And making sure as well that I had the right talent, because you cannot do the same amount of monitoring. You have to have a level of delegation between the time difference and the plane difference. So making sure as well that you had the right leaders in those different areas.
Coming from let's call it a Western European upbringing, what did you have to relearn to be successful in that role?
I think the diversity was a little bit of a challenge for me. And it's a challenge that I faced a little bit later down my career again.
Yeah.
I could see very quickly the richness that this was bringing to the conversation. So we had different type profile, different working style. Some of them were individual, but some of them were the country where you were coming from. And the way you work in Italy and the way you work in Poland is vastly different.
Yep.
The way you work in Germany and the way you work in French is vastly different. So between China and the US, very vastly different. I could see very quickly the beauty of having those different things around the table and how this was helping me with some blind spots. What I did find much harder was how do you manage a respectful and psychologically safe environment to bring those different voices to the table, especially in cultures. And China was a key challenge for me a bit later down the road of making sure that you create the space for the feedback. When if you have a Chinese team or an American team around the table, one team will provide feedback in a way which will be really, really open and as an exploration, and it's not necessarily always thought through. It's going to be, let's put things on the table. In the China or Japanese team as well, it was very hard to get. They would listen to what the leader was saying and trying to understand what were the expectations of the conversation without this free-flowing brainstorming. And there is not one way that is better than the other. The challenge is how do you get this to work collectively really well. So on this one, there was a lot of work on some of the teams on setting the expectation and showcasing what it could look like in a safe way. And there was a lot of general coaching and making sure that we had really good ground rules of interaction. So we were super clear. So for instance, we would do this, the black hat, the challenger hat, we would really have this. We would call that out and say, okay, I'm going to ask you, Jian, to be the challenger on this one. So being very explicit on giving the permission to step into a different role.
Yeah. Look, I think that's right. I think in any global role, it's such a mindful aspect that can easily get overlooked and not thought through, and that's quickly going to become a blocker.
Yes.
And I think how get different cultures to collaborate, as you say, come to the table for different conversations means different things. But ultimately, the innovation comes from that diversity, somewhere from the different thinking or the different way of looking at problems as well.
Yes.
I saw after a period of time there, so you then relocated to Melbourne. So how did that come about?
I can't believe how thorough you've been into your inquiry. Yeah. It's very precise. So this company I was working with, I had been doing a lot of work in technology, but work in finance, work in acquisition. I had been running into a series of roles, and there was an opening in Australia. Our CIO was going to retire, and they were looking for a talent. I actually knew really well the CFO because I had been working with him in the US. I knew some of the team who had been meeting in other parts of the world. And listen, I had that connection to Australia with Jed Doyle and some of the team that he had brought, and I had enjoyed so much working with. So it is really something that I was considering to explore. But in all fairness, we were coming for 2 or 3 years max. My husband and I never thought, we had never set a foot in Australia. It was not high on our list. We were just keen to continue travel, but it was nothing for Australia. It was an incredibly lucky strike. So this role came in, and again at the time there was other potential role in the group in Shanghai or in Colombia. But this one did fit a lot of things I wanted to do, and it was a regional CIO role. What I liked about that was it was looking after some countries I had zero experience in. So China was in there, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, very different country from one to the other, very different culture, different level of maturities of the organization we had there in technology, but across the board. So I had worked with more mature countries and companies. This in the portfolio with Australia and New Zealand was very exciting to me. And the other part was, it was a path to my first exec role as well. And I was very curious about it. I was very curious of what's happening around this table, how we're making decisions about our talent, about our strategy, about the different elements that will make an organization.
So how did you prepare yourself for that step up to the exec?
We had some really good programs. Again, given the sophistication that this company had at the time, we had really good program. I had an amazing mentor. And that was mostly it. And particularly, we had this talent program that was going over a year, where we had 5 sessions of a week with the CEO of the company and with some senior exec and some big thinker, whether we were in Brazil and it was an economist, and we would look at all the different elements of the company. So the company would take senior leaders into this kind of MBA program, if you will.
Yeah.
1 week on finance, 1 week on supply chain, 1 week on the market, 1 week on customer, and 1 week on overall leadership. And the overall leadership was taking place in Washington, where we met a lot of senators, and we actually even had 2 hours with the head of the CIA.
Oh, wow.
Which was, in terms of talking about leadership experience, was absolutely surreal.
Yeah.
So that was a massive help. But I have to say, I had a great mentor. I had 2 great mentors.
Yeah.
And they helped me navigating that as well, because it was a challenging role.
How do you think that kind of breadth of exposure has made you a better tech leader?
So I think there is if you're a tech leader, and if you're a BA, if you're an SAP team leader, if you're a CIO, there is a part which is common to all those roles, which is you need to understand your customer really, really well. And to understand your customer, you need to understand your customer in a variety of impacts. So when we talk about customer experience, it's going to be part of the service, the friction, the call center, but it's going to be the cost as well. So you need to understand all those dimensions. I think that is true at every level. I think what changes when you're reaching a senior position is you're becoming a steward of the business.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to do your role, your silo really well, but it has to be broader. Now you're as well co-responsible for where this organization is going. How are the process flowing end to end? How are we building the culture and the talent that will continue to support that? Do we have the right governance? How is the executive team interaction with the board? So there is a series of things that you're accountable for, and your role is becoming much more like a T-shape, if you will. It's not only the depth of your understanding, but that breadth as well. So I think for a tech leader, for any leader in an executive or a senior role, you need to be clear about your accountability on the rest of the organization, really not only on your department.
Yeah, great, thank you. You through that answer and several answers earlier, and actually reading your LinkedIn profile, there's a word that resonates constantly, and that's the word talent. And you have a real passion. It comes through very clearly for developing other people. And maybe that's kind of paying forward how you were developed yourself. Maybe there's a motivator from that. But I'm interested when you're looking for someone who has talent potential, hidden potential. How do you identify that?
What are the common traits? Curiosity is a very big one. I think a form of ambition, but I'm very careful with this word. I think it's the difference between the ambition of mastering your craft and the ambition of addressing a purpose.
Yeah,
that's really beautiful ambition. That's such a rich ambition. You're trying to master your craft. That drives connection. That drives creativity. That drives curiosity. That drives. It's not the ambition of I want to step higher as I can, as fast as I can. It's this richness of mastering your craft and solving good problem. So curiosity, ambition, and I think it ties into curiosity, but an ability to connect. I think that's probably one of the hardest things I'm seeing. People are and I'm the first one in that. You're going to be good in your role. You know what you have to do, but we are always part of the system. Even if you think your job is contained to something, you're part of a system. You need to understand how your roles evolve together with the organization and with the different roles evolution. You need to understand not only how your piece is going to have an influence, but how all those different pieces are going to work together to have this influence. And that ability to work and to connect, that's absolutely critical. And I think if you have that, if you have good brain and good creativity, if you have this ambition, you're driven and you want to do things forward, to leave the world a better place, and you're able to connect and create this connection, you can take on a lot of things.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think I feel like the world of work is changing so much at the moment. And maybe it always does change, but when you're in the change, it feels more intense.
Yeah.
But obviously we're right on the cusp with the advent of AI having a big impact on what we do.
Yeah.
There's a difference in the way that people work remotely, hybrid working, even the kind of geographical dispersal of people in the workplace is so much broader. I read this interesting piece of research that was showing pre-COVID, the average American lived 10 miles from the office. They now live 26 miles from the office on average.
Wow.
So we've got this big, it's a big shift in many things around work. But what I do believe is that connection in all those things is going to become more important because you can use AI and machine learning and quantum computing or whatever, and you can work remotely, but the people that can successfully connect with others and create connection, I think, are going to be the real trailblazers of the future.
I agree. And I think as well, the curiosity comes to play very, very much right now. There is on AI particularly, there's a lot of work we're doing in the PEXA context, but the first layer that we are doing is AI-enabled employee. And the idea behind it is we are starting to see a gap between your employability. It's not only your efficiency. We know that it's not AI versus human. It's human with AI versus human without AI.
Yep.
And we are seeing a gap of 30% employability between people with AI skills and people without the AI skills. Wow. So we know this from a productivity and impact potential perspective internally, but it's as well, what is your accountability to make sure that your team is market ready, always is market ready, and these skills are relevant. But I see a lot of fear and a lot of confusion. It feels a little bit overwhelming, and I'm going back to this curiosity. If you're curious and you lean into it and you're happy to try something, you know, you will always stay with those trends. You always take those opportunities when they arise. I think what's holding us is a fear of change and a sense that we can continue to work to do our work the way we have done it in the past years. I think even at the board level, it's a conversation that we were having. What does AI mean for a board? Does it change what your role is supposed to be? So yes and no, the essence of your job, no, it doesn't change. But how are you going to do it? Yes, it does.
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things there. I think probably the hardest people to pivot around AI will be the true specialists.
Yes.
Because they become more wedded to their specialization.
Yes.
It's more the kind of generalists with that broader knowledge that will be able to see the connections and make that kind of follow that curiosity. I also read, it was interesting, just to build on what you're saying, the latest or recent research from Tech Council Australia and Microsoft, I think forecasting $115 billion of impact on the Australian economy from AI, but 70% of that through productivity gains, which I think is, that's going to be interesting to see how that gets realized.
Yes.
I think what's probably hard as a consumer of AI is there's so many products and it's quite overwhelming to be able to kind of decipher what's good, what's not good, what works, what doesn't work. Personally, I've never experienced a kind of new innovation where there's so many products so quick to market. Yeah. And a lot of these products are testing to see if they're viable as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it will be interesting. Definitely interesting.
You know what I'm wondering on this one? I surely feel the same. And these past 10 years, when I was reflecting on what kept me so interested in technology, the past 10 years, there's been nothing like the first 10 years. And there's been an acceleration in so many dimensions. And in the last 2 years, Gen AI has been as well changing a lot of the way of things we're looking at. But we know as well that the acceleration is only increasing and it will get faster and faster. Yeah. So there is really something for us to crack into. How are we approaching those challenges? I think right now a lot of us are overwhelmed by how quickly it's going.
Yeah.
But it's not going to go as fast as the next innovation coming.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
right.
So how are we adapting our system, our mindset, our team, our talent to receive this constant wave of change, this accelerated wave of change?
Yeah, that's right. Because change can only happen at the speed of adoption. And it's one of the things that's played on my mind about how you go back a couple of years, everything was about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and NFTs and things. And for me, it probably just didn't really capture the minds enough of the general public or the general consumer. Maybe not so much in blockchain and so forth. I think that's still there in business. But in terms of it becoming really commonplace, I think it was hard for people to make sense of, to be able to adopt that quick. And you don't hear as much about it now. Now, probably because Gen AI is what people are talking about and cyber. But I think there has to be something between the adoption. I can't remember the data on this exactly, but I was reading, there's a book called Loonshots, if you've come across this, and they talk about how some of the biggest inventions in history, like radar, how that was invented and other things. But when something's invented, the expectation of the inventor in terms of when this product will become mainstream is the prediction is they always think it will happen much quicker than the reality.
Yeah.
And again, I can't remember the exact detail on this, but it was about an ATM or a cash machine, and they were invented back in the early 70s, but it took a full generation before they became commonplace. Now, technology's probably sped up a lot since then, but at the time they were predicting this would replace the main form of cash movement within a few years, but it didn't. It took a whole generation. So it would be interesting. It'd be interesting to see. And you just say, how do you get your teams ready? How do you get people ready to be able to embrace that curiosity as well?
I think some of the difference with the with Gen AI technology, though, is there is a lot of very actual, tangible, right now problem that it is able to solve. So it's not there's going to be a massive investment, and potentially it's going to, and not only potentially it's going to help you lift the problem that you have or change the problem that you have, but you have to change a lot of things in the system, and it will be a lot of energy consumed, etc. So we faced a lot of different challenges. The technology was extremely interesting. This idea of decentralization, it really is something that will continue to evolve. There is no doubt about that. But here we are talking about a tech that can solve problems right now, and a breadth of problem that is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So there's not so much of I think it's more. Yeah, it will be interesting to see who is able to take the lead and who is not. And I think it's not going to be about underpinning technology or sophisticated the technologies in the different organization. It's going to be about the ability to absorb change in the organization.
Yeah. And also the new jobs that get created. Because I think we hear a lot about the jobs that will be lost or the predictions of job loss, but probably not. And again, that's actually what caught my attention with the Tech Council Australia prediction of, I can't remember if it was maybe 200,000 jobs created. Yes. But let's start talking about those jobs. Let's start imagining what those jobs could be, and what kind of opportunities will be created to make it a bit more concrete. Because I think when there's the perception of gain, or something down the track for someone to gain, it's more enticing than the fear of loss.
Yes.
As well.
Yes, it's true. If we support people, employees, students into that path, so that's completely true. And right now, if you're looking at the billions all the Microsoft and Amazon are investing in AI around the world, we are seeing a lot of investment. We are not seeing a lot of costs, a cut and roll cut. We are seeing tons of investment, and all of us are running proof of concept and running agents, whether to help for our developments or for our employees with all the Microsoft Copilot of the world. So there is a lot of additional work that is created right now, more than anything. I think it's helping this transition. And I was hearing here, my eldest son is studying at Monash University. He's studying science and IT. And he was telling me last month, actually, the main conversation with their friends, with those groups are we even going to have a job if we're software engineers and we're finishing in 1 or 2 years? Are we going to even have a job? So, I'm playing it back. First of all, you'd better be curious and understand what's happening. If it's not in your school courses right away, you'd better be on top of that. That would be the basic. But on top of it, you're fantastically positioned to absorb this new learning that a lot of people will not be able to absorb. But you need to have that curiosity. And I think whether it's at university, we need to build those bridges, or definitely in organization where we have to create those programs of basic training, what's prompt engineering, what are the tools you could be using in a safe way, and showing the path, because it's like everything, it's a bit intimidating at the beginning, but not that much once you're in it. I'm sure people were intimidated using the internet for the first time or sending a first email.
Yeah.
So it's very, very similar. How do we create the safe opportunity? How do you create a path for adoption on the side of the path to train our workforce? And that's a huge leadership responsibility right now.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that, because when you were talking about your time actually at Oxford Brookes University, and I was thinking when I first came into recruitment in the early 2000s, about 2000, and I'd never sent an email, never had an email address, never been on the internet. And I remember sending the first few emails and then phoning the person, did you get it? It seemed really bizarre that I could sit at a computer and send this message to someone in real time. But you wouldn't think twice. You do it off our phones now. It's so yeah, it's the adoption. It's the comfort factor. It's the curiosity. Anyway, we've gone way off track. So we're going to get back to your career. So OI, so you left after 15 and a half years or so. Yes. How did you know it was time to leave?
Yeah. So OI, I had worked in all the regions and probably all the countries where we had activities. I had worked on a set of challenges that was very, very broad. I knew a lot of people in this organization, and I was in the exec team, and I had been in the exec team for maybe 2-3 years. And I felt, I did realize then that there was a level of curiosity and excitement that I was struggling to bring into the role. And there was still a lot of things to do, don't get me wrong, but I felt as well that there was something I wanted to do and I had done. And that all the problems that were coming, it's problems that I had already faced and seen and solved in a way, shape or form. So it became a bit easy, or a bit, now I'm on something a bit, I didn't find the challenge anymore. I didn't find the curiosity coming to me anymore. And I knew it was time. And honestly, that was an incredibly tough decision.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I had a lot of other opportunities moving on from there. But again, even if I looked at other geographies and other roles, I thought, So it was the time where I thought, now I choose comfort, or I choose to challenge myself. And I felt ready enough to challenge myself.
Yeah, right. But still daunting, still a brave move, still courageous.
Oh, after such a long time, it was, for sure. Yeah. Yes.
Look, I get it. I was with the company for 16 years. Yeah. And it was an incredibly tough decision. Yeah. But one that at that point, I would have been about 30, 38. Yeah. And I felt that if I didn't do it, I wasn't probably being honest to myself in the sense of testing myself somewhere else, somewhere different.
And I think we grossly underestimate how transferable our skills are after such a long time in the organization. And it's something I always say with people who've been 10 years in an organization and tell me it's going to be very hard to find something. It's not. You feel like when you've been in the same company for a long time, you feel that a big part of your value is knowing the company's system and the company's people, and you've seen it all, so you can. But it's not, and actually sometimes it holds you back because you tend to say, no, I've already seen it, I know how to answer. You don't bring again that, how could I do that differently? It's harder after 3 times you're seeing the same problem. And we grossly underestimate how problems can be similar, or the patterns that we could be reusing in our organization, and the freshness of thinking we can bring in a new organization.
Yeah, 100%. I also felt after that, after leaving and going to a different business, probably my learning curve over the next 2 years was accelerated, because I was suddenly exposed to so many different ideas and ways of thinking, or the same problems, but completely from a different perspective. Yeah.
And your contribution as well does accelerate, because somehow once you've mastered how things are done here, you can bring a lot of learnings that you've learned somewhere else that the organization haven't benefited from yet.
Yeah. So why Dulux Group? What kind of drew you to that role?
Oh, Dulux Group. I had that was another interesting one. I was actually hesitating between 2 other organizations at the time, and it would not necessarily have been my first pick, but someone who was a very trusted work partner, an amazing lady, Angela Tatlis, who I trusted both her skills and intent, kept on telling me, it's one of the best organizations, actually. They don't look flashy. They don't do a lot of marketing out there, about themselves. But they are super efficient. They are smart people, dedicated to their business. They love their customers. And above everything, they're very decent people. And I thought, okay, let's have a chat. So I met the team, and that was all very true. It was very impressive business, running like a machine, with a love of customer, with a deep care for employees, an executive team that had been really stable for a long time. And sometimes it can be not great, but in this case was amazing. Yeah. The depth of of knowledge and care for that business and for each other. The respect was just probably the best I've seen. It was really, really fabulous. And the other thing that, so first, the culture and the team was my first attraction. But the second thing I loved, and I got to enjoy a lot when I worked there, was I wanted to work for a product that people knew. Working in glass packaging, I would always take, a bottle and look at the bottle and say, oh, look, that's me. Because you can see the little OI at the bottom of the glass. But, when you're saying, oh, Dulux paint or Yates Garden or Saley's, everybody who does a bit of work in a house would know that.
Yeah.
And the response of people to those different brands was always very strong. Like, oh yeah, I've painted my house with Dulux. It's the best. I say, yeah, I know it's the best. So that was really lovely to work for an organization that was close to the heart of a lot of Australians as well.
Yeah, great. And you, obviously, after 16 years with OI, you kind of went in there, I guess you got a blank slate to reinvent yourself.
Yes.
So
yes.
What did you kind of set out to achieve?
We had, I think that the biggest challenge that Dulux Group was facing at that time was we had a new chief marketing officer, really bright man, US based, who was looking at modernizing our approach to marketing. So Dulux Group is really a very strong sales and marketing organization, very, very robust, but didn't have yet the depth of that digital layer.
Yeah.
So it was not a digital marketing or digital sales organization. And considering the importance of those different brands and channel to market, and that was a huge endeavor to accomplish. So we were at the time as well looking at the upgrade of the main ERP and how we could rationalize some of the work there. We did as well some work. There was a lot of services, 13 different services that had been outsourcing, and we had very average results. So we were looking at bringing back those services. Yeah. But I would say out of everything, what was the most fascinating to drive together with this team and watch was the digitalization of the sales and marketing layer. How do we get much better insights? How do we bring lots of services online, whether it's training video, whether it's color matching or color advisory, or helping you with all sort of technical issue and just bringing back all those insights to fuel innovation in the business. That was amazing.
So that was a kind of new area for you personally?
It was a completely new area for me. Yes.
So if I compare that to OI, you're kind of getting closer to the consumer.
Yes, exactly.
In many ways with that. As you say, I imagine OI, you're mostly selling into FMCG companies.
Yeah, and it was a lot about the robustness of your operation, again, which had its complexity, but that was the main gig, where Dulux Group was much more about the customer experience.
Yeah. So what if you were to summarize that time, what did you learn about yourself?
That was a big test because I hadn't been. I had been in the same company for a long time, so my ability to lead a team without the network of support and that I had was something that I needed and wanted to test. Again, I was very keen to understand what an Australian organization, a country organization could be leading in the market. What can you bring as an organization? How do you give back to community, etc.? And I didn't know, how to operate in that context. So that was something else that I developed, and I enjoyed. It's a tough question you're asking, actually. I'm trying to buy time here. But
that's okay, I can tell. That's right. You can come back to me if you think of something later. So you moved on from Dulux Group and joined PEXA.
Yes.
So you've then come away in something altogether new, right? In prop tech, and as CTO as well.
Yeah.
So slightly different. And I was going to ask, what is the difference between your role as a CIO and a CTO?
Yeah, so the difference in the CTO role, the way we would usually frame it is you get a stronger commercial lens to it. Yep. So the CIO will be looking at all the internal technology that the business will be requiring, while the CTO will look as well at what is that product technology. So really in PEXA, we are blending the two together. I'm looking after the platform and our customer markets, but I'm looking after the workplace technology, cybersecurity, which is a huge one as well. So it's a bit of a blended role.
Got it. It's more like a CITO.
That's it.
Yeah, okay.
That's it.
So I'm always interested to ask CTOs this question. So I read this, and I'll forward it to you if you're interested, but there's a McKinsey article where they described different types of CTO.
Uh-huh.
And it said, as a CTO, and I've got notes, so I'm going to have to read these, but you can be the challenger, the influencer, or the enabler. And we're going to run out of time if I have to try and explain each of those. But I was going to ask you, which one do you think you are?
The challenger?
The influencer or the enabler?
Probably a little bit the challenger.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's a hard question as well. Probably the challenger. There's some things that we wanted to draw, because it's an organization that is forming a lot right now still.
Yes.
So we have to push the thinking, think out of the box, review how we are getting organized, how we're going to deliver things. That is a role every exec in PEXA needs to have.
Yep.
Yes, so probably more the challenger.
Because there's a lot happening, isn't there? Because I know you've gone into the UK market.
Yes.
There's a lot there as well around sort of data analytics. Because
Yes.
PEXA's been an incredibly big success story
Yes.
from kind of what it set out to do.
Yes, and in this one, there is a lot of rethinking. How we're going to grow. So PEXA is a world first, country leading organization on e-conveyancing. We cracked a problem in Australia that hasn't been cracked anywhere else. Now we're thinking, okay, how do we crack this in UK? But again, from a technology perspective, we really need to think, how are we going to grow as a business? What's the platform growth look like? And how are we making sure that we bring the best of what we learn, but we are bringing something as well that is going to scale to other assets and other geographies? Yeah,
interesting. Look, in the UK, it's probably, I'm assuming, one of the toughest markets in the world. Having bought and sold property in the UK, it's an incredibly stressful experience.
Fantastic opportunity. Yes.
It is a great opportunity. If you can solve that one, it's going to go global. Beyond PEXA, you've also stepped into some interesting kind of non-exec roles. I think I'm pronouncing it right, Time Les?
Yes.
Which was more around sustainability,
yes.
I believe, for a period, and most recently with Tech Council Australia.
Yes.
So how did that, the latter, the Tech Council Australia, how did that come about?
Yeah, so that's a very recent appointment. I was appointed a couple of weeks ago, so there you are. We've been doing some really good work with the Tech Council of Australia, so the technology big body, industry big body. We had been doing some work around data, around AI, and a bit around talent as well. Yeah. So there was a lot of things of interest to me in there, and I have a lot of time for the exec and the board team over there. It's very so to me there is a lot of synergy with the work we're doing with PEXA and leaning into the ecosystem, and that's really a passion of mine. So when we think about cybersecurity and resilience, when you think about talent, it's very hard to think about it in isolation. We can continue to have those reskilling programs, etc., but we want to think about it at the industry level, not at your own little level.
Definitely.
So I was really pushing for those conversations, and there was a board opening in the Tech Council of Australia. Again, it's just work I'm very passionate about. I applied, and there I am. So I'm very excited about this appointment.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're going to try something new now. And I did read, and I didn't ask you the question, but I saw when you were at OI Group, you were innovation director.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you about innovation, but we're definitely running short of time. But we're going to innovate now. So this is the first time we've done this after 25 episodes. So it's our lightning round. So we've got some cards.
All right.
So I'm going to ask you to take 3 of these cards at random.
Okay.
And then if you could read the question, and then give us an answer in a tweet.
And you're not going to make it up, but to see it, so I can make it up if I.
You can make up your own questions.
Right. What's next in your career bucket list? Definitely working more on influencing policies and ecosystem, but I would love as well to do this for my main role. Definitely, that's the next one. If you were a brand, what would be your motto? Creating awesomeness. At what time of the day do you get your best work done? Probably between 6 and 11 a.m.
You're a morning person?
Oh, yes. Big time.
There you go. Okay. Have you always been a morning person?
Yes, I love this. But then that means that at 8 p.m. my brain is not functioning anymore. So everything has a downside.
That's right. Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you. I've got a couple of lightning questions I'm going to ask you in addition. Have you got any career regrets?
Yes. So I talked about a bit earlier about diversity and creating a psychological safe space. It's something in one of my roles that I wasn't able to do, and I was a recent leader, and and I feel disappointed about that. I think it's the foundation of your leadership role is to be able to create a psychologically safe place. So that's something I wish I had picked on earlier. I think a regret I have is I think I was pretty bold in the different assignments that I took. But if I had understood how much of a marathon this all is, I think I would have been even more bold, and I would have taken the beginning of my career more lightly. I think I would have stepped into with even more curiosity, and more in what can I learn, what are the experiences that I can absorb before I take it all seriously. And I think it was, and keep in mind, in the early 2000s, we had 10 to 12% of unemployment in France. We had some really dreadful things across Europe. So it was high on our mind to make sure that you prove yourself. But that's probably something I would do differently now.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So maybe not that rush to responsibility.
Yeah, no. Yes, I would. I would go and more try. Just like a graduate, try 5, 6 very different things. Gets to
What are you most proud of in your career?
Been building some very diverse team, and gender diversity in technology is a challenge. So right now at PEXA, we had 20% of female in tech when I joined, and we have 35%. And it's not about only female, but we know that when we bring better gender diversity, that creates better background diversity, better neurodiversity. You're opening that door. I'm very passionate about that, and I love creating an environment that have this diversity and this safety. I'm very proud about that.
Okay. I believe that we're shaped by the feedback we receive. What's the most significant feedback you've received in your career?
A feedback or an advice I had from one of my mentors, who would have been watching me in those kind of MBA leadership program. And the feedback was, we had done a sort of presentation on stage, and it probably didn't appear very strong as a group. And it was a series of very high potential individuals, very ambitious, and we were all trying to have the right answer. And the feedback was about not only the ability to work as a team, and that first of all, it was on the ability of working as a team, and how that was more important than anything else. You could be the best in your answer if you didn't come to it as a group in the end, it was useless. That was very big. And there was a follow-on feedback from that, which was learn to fit without fitting. And in several of my roles, I got the role because I came to the role with a very different angle. I would have done something, or I would have had an angle to how to approach it, which was very different. So I had been offered a factory director role in Europe, where we had 39 other factory directors. They were all in their 60s, former engineer, going through the same path, and me, coming from technology. I was in my early 30s, very different background. But I had been managing change project for those and this acquisition of this factory in a way that they hadn't seen before. And they said, that's the culture we want to set, etc. So you need to be really clear about what you're bringing as a difference. But the second part of this, fit without fitting. You need to understand the without fitting. You need to understand the difference you bring. But you need to bring it in a way which doesn't clash with the rest. Again, if you cannot go with the rest of the team, and if you don't understand how all of you together with your difference are going to come to an outcome, it's counterproductive. It just creates a lot of unnecessary friction. So that was a big aha moment, and that was in my first leadership exec role of how do I bring my difference of perspective, but in a way which everybody can hear and which is respectful of what everybody else is bringing.
Yeah.
That was a big one for me.
Yeah, great. Last kind of career type question. What's the singular piece of sage advice you would give to the next generation?
Really, even more than us, I'm repeating the same, but be curious. Yeah. Be curious. The world that you know now is not the world that we have known, and it's not the world that you will have in 10 years. And we are not going to stop that. But within this, there is a lot of fabulous opportunity and grace and learning and problems that we were not able to crack that we will be able to crack. So you really have to lean into this with embracing a bit the chaos, embracing that maybe, you know, those pathways that are going to be the same forever are not, except for very, very few jobs. And lean with it with as much curiosity as you can.
Yeah, perfect. A sort of closing question I ask every guest is it's not a career question. It's more, what are you kind of reading? What are you listening to? What recommendations do you have?
So I do read a lot, and I read very broad things. So I read a couple of really interesting things lately. One is an Australian book on fire. It's called Fire, A Climate Tale, I think. And this is about the fires that we had a couple of years ago. But this book mostly focuses on resilience and resilience of communities. I think there are so many amazing parallels for us in the cyber era, and how we want to build resilience at the different grounds, and how you want to empower subsystem. And that was a fascinating one, both as an Australian citizen and as a tech, looking at the tech parallel. I really loved it. Another one that I loved was This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Pelroth, and she was the New York Times cyber expert for a decade, and she just tracing cyber histories and cyber impact and cyber risk, and done in a way that is much more like a thriller novel rather than a book on such a dry topic. Absolutely fabulous and important read. And probably the last one is a book called Invisible Woman, and it's on how design decision, whether on city design or medicines or cars, or are based on data that either doesn't gender differentiate, or that are solely focusing on male data, and consequently how we are shaping an unfair and unbalanced society, just keeping half of the population in this invisible mode. And that was
that's interesting.
Yeah, very enlightening. Yeah.
I heard something on that last point recently from Nike, and they were talking about soccer boots and how a whole generation of young girls growing up playing soccer were wearing boys' soccer boots because female soccer boots didn't exist, and it was causing injuries and then early career retirements and so forth. Whereas now apparently one of the best-selling footwear in Australia is young girls going into Foot Locker and asking for Sam Kerr's soccer boots. Yeah,
but you can decline this to PPE equipment, including in the police force, where we just do it for smaller, not for adapted to the women mythology, or the car seat belt, where you don't need to do a crash test for female body. You just do a crash test on male body, which are significantly different, as you know. Yeah. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, that is interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so generous with your time and for answering these questions.
Was a delight.
There's a ton of insightful takeaways from this that I think are going to inspire a lot of people. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page, for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.